And we are now recording.
All right, thanks, Mike. So I'll say right out the gate, this is Facebook, which is also Instagram, if you didn't know, centric. So it has nothing to do with paid search, any other kind of display advertising, like on an ad network. So right out of the gate, that is what this is about. If you want to talk to me personally about other things to do with paid search or other digital advertising, happy to do so. But they're not as fun, they're not as complex, and I find that Facebook advertising is generally where you can really grow a business. The other ones primarily are just refining it and so on. So with that, jump into the agenda. I'm going to go over Facebook and how essentially it's a machine learning company. I'm going to talk about ad creative, why it can be a difference maker. So you can be taught how to do campaign structure, even very specifically to your business, where you can really make a difference and separate yourself from any other advertiser or your direct competition is in ad creative. So we're going to spend a pretty good amount of time on that and how to make that difference, not only aesthetically and creatively, but how to optimize it through the algorithm and through the platform. And we'll talk about audiences, highly targeted audiences, niche audiences versus broad. That LAL, if you don't know what that means, what that stands for, that's lookalike audiences. It's in some cases kind of the best of both worlds, being that it is a profile that is highly targeted, but the audience itself is very broad. Then we'll talk about specifically campaign structure and something called learning phase that Facebook does as part of their algorithm to get you better outcomes. And then we'll kind of talk about how you want to dictate your campaign budgeting strategy based on what your company's goals are, whether you're going for broke on top line revenue growth or if you're trying to become profitable. So a little bit about me. I've been building Facebook. Yeah, I like that. I've been building Facebook ad campaigns for about a decade now. Initially as an employee of a Fortune 100 company, then for a digital agency, and then finally I started my own consultancy where I kind of go in and out of helping people. Sometimes I won't have a client for months at a time, and sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 at a time. In 2013, I co-founded an e-commerce startup called Cuddle Clones. The co-founder is on this very call. We sell a number of custom pet-related products. If you don't know what it is, the flagship product is a 100% custom stuffed animal of your pet. You may have seen some of our ads on Facebook, or at least heard the concept. Cuddle Clones has recently been placed in the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies for the 3rd year in a row, which I'm told only happens like 10% of the time. It is 8 figures in revenue, and all of that with essentially me as the solo marketer. A lot of that growth primarily was through Facebook advertising. I'm also a big animal advocate, and I like golf and playing guitar, even though I'm awful at both. So here's just a couple of the companies that I've done ad work for or other marketing kind of ad structures for. Suffice to say I have a fair amount of experience on how to approach both completely new companies that have either zero budget starting off with or very small budget, up to very large companies that need to optimize and scale existing budgets. The clients will vary in sophistication and what they're trying to get out of the platform, but the tenets of what I would do for them, or what really any consultant would do for them, is really the same. It's optimize their ad spend. It's optimize what their outcome is, whether it's purchases, leads, whatever it might be. And honestly, if you understand the tenets of how to optimize ads and understand how to pair that with your specific growth or your profitability strategy, you don't really need a big agency. You or someone in-house, or really even one other person, can do a lot of what you would get from an agency just with a little bit of training and kind of dedication to understanding the platform. So over the next, it's probably 20, 30 minutes or so, I'll teach you kind of at a high level what I do to help get you started down that path. So at its core, Facebook is a machine learning company. There are literally billions of ad auctions that happen every day. It's billions every day. And the only way to perform that kind of work efficiently and fairly to each advertiser, not looking at budgets or past history of spending, is with machine learning in the moment. So all ad auctions that determine who sees an ad, essentially what the price of that ad is is determined by Facebook's machine learning algorithm. At a high level, the best way to understand what that algorithm is attempting to do is to understand that it simultaneously is trying to maximize advertiser value, so return on your ad spend, and maximize content value for the Facebook or Instagram user. So Facebook wants you to enjoy your experience and not feel inundated with ads, but it also wants to make that money. So it tries to display ads in a way that doesn't disrupt your consuming of the social media content, or even better yet, the ad itself is viewed as content, not as an ad that you don't mind consuming. A lot of times you don't even realize that it's an ad that you might like, share, and engage with, comment on, even more so than typical organic posts that aren't ads. So let's look at a simplified kind of example here. Let's pretend that 7 advertisers are competing for the right to send an ad to a person that matches all the demographic and behavioral markers of someone like Guy Fieri, or Fieri, however he pronounces his name, which is to say a male, late 40s, likes wearing shirts that have flames on them. Who doesn't? Probably has a lot of food-related searches in his browser history, loves blonde hair dye. Who wins the right to show this guy their ad, and what all goes into that? Well, in a sense, it is like a traditional auction. So all these advertisers went in with an actual bid, whether they manually entered that bid or had Facebook perform the bid automatically for them, which is what 90% of advertisers do. And you say, well, obviously the person who bid the most money won that auction, right? Well, not necessarily. Remember that Facebook wants the user to enjoy the ad if possible, or better yet, not even notice that it is an ad. So maybe that they interact with it, they think it's organic. So that's the advertiser that has the highest monetary bid doesn't always win the auction. There's a total ad score that determines who wins the auction. And it looks something like this. So you have an advertiser bid, literally what you're willing to pay for the right to win the auction. And again, that can be a manual bid if you want to get into complex structures, or just an automatic bid that Facebook does on your behalf. Then you have your estimated action rates. This is historical data that is pulled from your ad account as a whole, so every ad you've ever run as a whole, and your individual campaign, the campaign that is specific to that ad in the moment. Then you have your user value, which is how much engagement you're getting on your ad. So do people like viewing your ad? If it's a video, do they view it at least 50% of the time of the runtime on average? Is that better than other video ads? Do they comment on your ad more? Do they share your ad more? Do they like your ad more? That's where you get into your user value. So the scores of these 3 items, kind of starting from the left, comprise your total value score. And that determines if you win the auction. Now, here's kind of the juicy part. One way to lower your ad costs is to have great estimated actions and great user value. If you do that, Facebook will say, man, these ads are so good, we're going to let them win the auction even at a lower monetary bid price, because they're just such good ads, and they help us balance that mix of advertiser value and user value. So it's really important to optimize your website. This is the estimated action rates section. Optimize your website, or if you have an app, optimize that for click-through, for site speed. Site speed is a really big marker for Facebook. If you have a really slow site, they ding you quite a bit for that. And it'll lower your ad costs. Literally, if your site has good click-through rate, your ads, you have good conversions, so it's costs by not doing anything with your creative. And if you get those lower ad costs early, you spend a lot of time early getting that right, then you're really set up for growth. The alternative is also true. So if your conversion rate is awful and your ads are like bland as hell, you're actually going to pay higher than average to win the right to show your ads to people, which is not a good place to be. So within ad man, so if you have a below average ranking on the measurements here, on a number of ads, you may want to pause your campaigns and rethink your creative. Hopefully you never see below average on any of your ads. If so, it isn't on your ads that are probably spending all the money. If you've never looked at your ad quality scores, you're probably in the majority. This is not something that has really been around for very long. And even though it's been around for definitely, that it actually is not just, hey, you have nice ads. It actually changes monetarily how much you're paying for ads. So I got, Wilford Brimley here. Check your ad scores and check them often, because they generally will give you an idea of whether or not the ad has potential or if it's kind of going south. And do it early in the campaign too. You don't want to be spending tons of money 2 months in and saying, oh, well, we thought we had the best campaign structure in the world and da-da-da-da. And then you find your ad quality just would not have passed the sniff test a week in if you had been checking your quality scores. Now, the best way to kind of ensure that your ad creative passes that ad quality test before you throw it into a big campaign, a campaign with a lot of budget, is to test each element of the ad separately and then combine those elements to create what I'll just call it a super ad, a very optimized ad. And once you have a few super ads, then you can crank up the spend. So we'll jump into how to create a super ad. So Facebook has a typical A/B split testing tool. If you've ever heard of A/B testing, create one complete ad, and create a second ad, put them both in there, see which one does better. And there's actually a testing tool that Facebook will split the spend between those two creatives for a period of time, and then Facebook will declare a winner and kind of give it spend. Well, hardly anyone uses the Facebook A/B testing tool. Facebook pretty much admits that it's not very good. They've even de-emphasized it on their platform quite a bit. They really pushed it for a couple of years, and now they've pretty much all but said, don't use it. And that was after a lot of advertisers ran tests using their split A/B testing tool and showed that Facebook was basically declaring a winning creative way too early in the process. And it was declaring winners based on like one KPI, and you couldn't customize what the KPI should be that it should be optimizing for. So the best way to truly creative test, in my opinion, is to use another tool that Facebook has, which is called a dynamic creative ad, or DCA is the acronym that's used quite a bit. This allows you to enter a bunch of videos, a bunch of images, a bunch of primary text. You can see my cursor here, a bunch of headlines, a bunch of descriptions, a bunch of website URLs. Now you could enter in, let's say in this example, I have 3 videos here. I could enter in 3 videos, 3 versions of primary text, 3 versions of headlines, and this dynamic creative ad will create a unique combination of all the permutations of those. So it'll take this video and take the first text, the first headline. It'll take that video, take the second text, the second headline, and so on, until it creates a combination of all of those variables. That will work, but it will take forever to get results on, because you'll be spreading your budget so thin because you'll have essentially like 40 ads running at one time. So the best way to do it quickly is to test an element and then optimize for that element, then move on and test another element. So the example here is that we're testing 3 videos. These videos are different in what they look like and what they say, and you want them to be, I don't say dramatically different, but pretty damn different from one another, or else you're not really testing what the differences are, and you can't attribute the results to what the differences are if they're pretty similar. So 3 pretty different creatives, and in this case videos, and then only 1 primary text, only 1 headline, only 1 description, only 1 landing page. And we'll quickly find, so that's only going to create 3 ads essentially. But the one difference between those 3 ads is the video. So we'll know which of these 3 videos is the better video. Once you have that better video, then you switch it up. Now you take that optimized winning video, and now you test 3 different primary texts. Run it back again. Which primary text was your winner? Now you take the winner of the primary text, the winner of the video, test 3 headlines, and so on. And this allows you to kind of get to those best, the winners of each element without having to do the 40 combinations up front and take forever. So let's say that I ran this one right here, 3 videos, 1 text, 1 headline. And I came out that this first video, this video over here won. Well, I'm still going to go through the rest of the dynamic creative and try to optimize. I'm going to test 2 different or 3 different texts, and I'm going to test 2 or 3 different headlines. But if I wanted to right out of the gate, I already know this video is a winner. I could go put that video in an ad campaign that has a big budget already because I know it's already a good video, probably compared to what I'm doing right now. So I can incrementally carve out the winners of each element and put them into ads while I'm still creating the super ad. If that makes sense. And at the very end, you have a super ad, maybe a couple if they performed very close to each other. So time is the most crucial thing to consider here. You can't be testing forever. Test an element, get a winner, put that winner in some ads, keep testing elements until you have one ad that's comprised of like 5 different winning elements. So here's a test we ran at Clones over the last week or so, and you might be tempted to say, well, it looks like the third video did the best. It has, you know, a whopping 10.31x return on ad spend. Well, that is nice, but notice that Facebook didn't give it much ad spend. Why would Facebook do that if it was performing so well? Because the algorithm knows what creative is going to perform well over time. It knows what the right balance of advertiser value and user engagement is. There are literally hundreds of performance metrics that go into determining success of an ad, and what amount of money it spends per creative is telling you this is going to be the most successful. Our entire algorithm, which has, you know, all the advertisers' data compiled, and it gets smarter every day, is saying the one we're spending the most money on is the one that you need to put into your big campaigns because it will scale better. So almost always go with the creative element Facebook has put more ad spend into. In Facebook's eyes, that element will perform the best in the auctions and its scale as you raise your budget. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, just jump in at any point. So I want to kind of go through the creative itself too. So some people might say, all right, yeah, that's all good, but I don't even know how to create creative. And maybe I'm a small team or I have a startup and I don't really want to hire a bunch of, you know, contractors to do some creative. Well, there's kind of some like best principles, best practices, and then some things to kind of keep in mind. And then I have kind of here at the bottom here, some tools to where you can create ads very inexpensively on your own. And even within those ads, and just do some YouTube searches and some general Google searches on how to create some ads within these tools, you'll be in a really good spot. Couple of things to keep in mind that aren't on here, and I kind of did a big list here. I'm not going to go through all this, but so if you want to go through the playback later and pause this or screenshot it, that's the route I would go. But a couple of things I didn't include on here. When you do videos, 15-second videos is what I would really go with, especially if it's going to go to an audience who already knows who you are. So if they visited your site, left your site, and now you're going to, what is called retarget them, send them that specific group who's already understands who you are in some way. They visited your site, maybe they viewed a couple of your ads already. They know who you are. They know what you sell. 15-second videos is the best way to capture that audience well. Short attention span, so you don't, if they see 1 minute, they're going to flip probably. But also there's a number of ad placements within Facebook and Instagram and soon to be WhatsApp that only allow for 15-second videos. So if your video is 16 seconds, you're not going to go on like 3 of the 6 placements because they deem that longer videos aren't meant for those ad placements. And this is something that Facebook's, it's not really new, but the placements have changed. Now you're seeing Facebook, they're doing kind of like YouTube and other video platforms have done, where you might be watching video on Facebook, some kind of organic thing that from like the dodo, if you know what that is. Mid video, it'll come in with an ad video, your ad. If you're under 15 seconds, you can get in that placement. If you're not, if you're 16 seconds or above, it won't allow you in that placement in a lot of instances. And you may say, well, those are super annoying. I don't even want my ad to be in that. It's a negative connotation. I just interrupted something they were watching. And I wouldn't disagree with that from a user perspective, but the algorithm will learn that. If it's putting you in those placements and you're not getting any clicks or any conversions, it'll stop putting you there. So let the algorithm do its thing, but at least give it all the opportunity in the world by making your creative fit what it needs. Another thing that's a lot bigger now than it was in the past is stories, both on Instagram and Facebook, vertical videos. So the dimensions of your ad need to be specific to the platforms that are going on now. And you can kind of play it safe and do 1-by-1 dimension, and that'll work on everything. It just won't look that great. So you can really kind of get, again, be a difference maker in the creative if you start doing dimensions specifically for each platform. And when you're creating your ad, Facebook is actually, their UX is pretty good on this. It'll say, upload your video. Now, do you want to create or upload specific videos for each placement? And that's where you can do, yes, I do want a 4x3 for this placement, or 16x9 for this placement, whatever it's recommending. The next thing I want to do is talk about best ways to kind of select your audiences. So you can get super niche in Facebook, exact demographic data, interests, behavioral data, etc. But unless you have a product that only appeals to a super specific set of people, you should not limit your audience too much. The more constraints there are on an audience, meaning the more hyper-specific the audience is, the more expensive it will be. If you hyper-target, you're basically telling Facebook to only enter you into a small subset of ad auctions. And when that happens, you end up paying more on average to deliver kind of your outcomes, whether that's purchases or leads or whatever. So what you want to do is target relevant people, of course, but balance that with the scale of a broad audience. What that does is give you more potential auctions to enter in and possibly win. And when there are more auctions and more ad inventory, that means you have to enter a few of them to actually win and to deliver your objectives. A really good way to do this, kind of meld the broad versus the niche, is lookalike targeting. And I'll go over lookalike targeting here in just a second. But I really want to focus kind of on this broad versus niche. This is something I think that new Facebook advertisers and even some agencies that aren't very good really push, just because the capability is there, to super target down on your target customer. And everything you're ever taught in marketing is super define that target market and go after them exactly where they're at. And that works for almost every channel platform. It does not work on Facebook for all advertisers. And I would even say the majority of people, it doesn't work for. If you have a very, very specific product that you know only 40-year-old men buy that live in Kentucky, then yes, do niche targeting. If your product is at all somewhat broad, then at least at a minimum, test a broad audience. So this is kind of an example just through numbers of what I'm talking about. If you created 2 campaigns, 2 ad sets, one was broad, so it was all genders, so both male and female, all ages, no geographic, behavioral, interest targeting, or nothing basically. Just saying all of Facebook essentially. Target all of Facebook. I'm not going to narrow it down any more than that. And you had a separate ad set that said only target 35-year-old females who love cats and make $75K or more annually. You gave the same amount of spend to both of them. Well, the very narrow audience is going to be more expensive. This is your cost. This is also called CPA, CPM, I'm sorry, if you've ever heard that acronym. Cost per million, which is cost per 1,000 impressions. Your cost, because it's a more narrow audience, is going to be higher. I made these numbers up. It would probably actually be even worse than this, but it just made it double, basically. Double as costly as the broad audience. Now you're using the same ads, the same creative for both creatives. Now you could say, well, the 35-year-old is part of my target market more, so they're going to click through more often. That could be true, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll say that the click-through rate on the ad is very similar, or the same, essentially. And you say, all right, well, 35-year-old females, I know that's my market. I've done my demographic stuff on purchasers. They're going to convert higher. And yes, they will, 2% in this example. And the broad's not going to convert that high. It's going to convert at 1.2. But because it was only half as expensive, it actually ends up being a cheaper customer acquisition cost because the ad cost was so cheap because you made it so broad. This doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't work out of the gate, but it can become a reality. So I'm going to go just to drive the point home again. One more example here. Let's say that's the exact same 2 audiences, same click-through rate, but the conversion rate was not nearly as good on broad. It stayed the same for 35-year-old females, 2%, and look, the narrow audience is a better customer acquisition cost because they had a 1 or 2.5 times conversion rate, whatever that is. That's true. for the first 40 to 50 purchases, it's true. This is a big, big thing that a lot of people don't know, is that once a Facebook ad set reaches 50 events, in most cases this is purchases, but it could be lead signups, it could be add to carts, it's whatever you select as your campaign objective. But when it reaches 50 events, it exits the learning phase. And basically Facebook is saying, all right, our algorithm now has enough data from your 50 events, let's say purchases, your 50 purchases, that we can now profile who those purchasers are. And it may have found that through the algorithm, it was a 35-year-old female who loves cats and makes 75K or more a year. But you did that within a broad audience. So going forward, after 50 purchases, the algorithm is going to start going after this demographic, this profile, but in this ad set, which stays at $6. So you could essentially get up to getting the conversion rate of a very narrow defined profile, but with the cost of a broad audience. The other thing that's that I would say in favor of broad audiences is that your narrow audiences are going to saturate quickly. So if you're spending, especially as you spend more, say you're spending $10,000 a day, there's only so many 35-year-old females who love cats and make over 75K a year. And they may convert it 2%, let's even say 3%. It converts like crazy. It's really good. Well, go ahead and knock out those amount of people until you saturate them like crazy and they see your ad, 4 to 5 times a week. Well, it's not really a strategy for scaling. It's not really a strategy for growth. You're going to have to go outside of that once you've saturated that very narrow niche market. And maybe your business, your product can't handle that. It's only for a very specific group. And that means just the addressable market's very small. Oh, somebody say something? No. So the addressable market could be very small, and that's just what your business is, and that's fine. But if you're looking to grow, you're going to have to eventually go into broad audiences. It's the only place that you can really scale at a big volume and quickly. So one way to strike a balance, like I kind of mentioned earlier, is to our balance between the broad and the narrow audiences is through something called lookalikes. This is when you kind of jumpstart the profile you would be typically getting after 50 plus purchases from a broad audience, but with the data you already have. So if you have a list of 1,000 purchasers, you can upload their email addresses to Facebook. It'll create a little audience that you say, all right, my purchasers from the last 4 months or whatever. Then there's a tool where you can create a lookalike audience of those purchasers. So it looks at all their demographic, behavioral, interests, everything you can think of that profiles your existing customers, and then it creates a lookalike audience, and you can create them at from 1% of lookalike up to 10% of lookalike. And what that means is it'll create a profile. Here's what your purchasers look like. And it'll say, do you want the top 1% that look the most like your purchasers? Here they are, and it's roughly 1 million people. If you want to make that bigger, the top 2%, it's like 2 million, and then so on. You get up to 10%, the top 10%, that's like 10, 20 million. Once you doing that, basically gets you right out of the gate, not trying to get to 50 purchases or trying to optimize later. Right out of the gate, you've already optimized the profile that Facebook is looking for. And typically the cost is not nearly as high as a very narrow niche market as well. So the best advertisers kind of have a targeting strategy that is heavily reliant on lookalike-based targeting, broad and lookalike. There's a bunch of different, audiences within Facebook that you can build lookalikes off of. It's not just purchasers. That is the biggest or the best one, not the biggest, the best one usually, because it's truly who bought something. So they may profile very differently. People that get to your cart and abandon can profile very differently from people that actually went through and purchased, strikingly differently sometimes, especially the more pricey your product is, because it's more of a commitment. The profile and how they behave truly does change the more expensive your product gets. Now, if you're selling something that's $4 or $5 and is kind of generic, the people that get to your cart and that purchase probably profile very similar. They're probably in the Venn diagram overlap quite a bit. So it does depend on your product how successful the lookalike audiences are. But if you're looking to scale, let's say you've run Facebook ads for 6 months or so with like a smaller budget, and you're like, all right, I'm getting good results. Now I want to scale. Lookalike audience is the best place to start scaling, because it doesn't just start broad across a big budget. It starts with a really good profile. And you can do it on people that add to cart on here, people that spent the highest amount of time on your site. You can also, of your purchasers, if you have them in a CSV, sort by the people who spent the most money. So you can only go after the people who spent, like, let's say over 300 bucks, even though your average order value might only be 50. So only profile the people that spend a lot of money. That can become a lookalike audience. You can also do lookalikes off of people who have just shown interest. So people who have viewed your ads, people who have followed you on Facebook or Instagram. The high value lookalikes are, again, the people who look like not only your customers, but again, your best customers. So if you have a lot of customers, you maybe only want to do a lookalike on the top half, people who have either bought multiple times or spent the most money. So a robust and detailed lookalike strategy is really essential to scaling efficiently once you decide, I'm going to scale this. Just visually to kind of show what I just talked about there, you can have an ad set that's a 1%, the people that look most like the top 1% of my purchasers, the top 1% of my add to carters, top 1% of my Instagram followers, top 3% lookalikes of my purchasers. And then in that case, you'd want to exclude this group over here so you're not hitting the same people twice. But also with interest. So this is a little bit of a curveball here. You can say, all right, I want the top 3% of my lookalikes, people that look like my purchasers, but also who like dogs, or also who live in Kentucky. So you can add some kind of clarifiers there to broaden it out, or to narrow it in a little bit. So we talked about learning phase earlier. Learning phase is very important. Many advertisers I've worked with are constantly resetting the learning phase and didn't realize they were doing that. This means you're wasting your ad budget. As soon as the algorithm optimizes your campaign, you reset it by performing one or more of the actions that you're seeing on screen. This isn't an official list of things that resets learning phase. In fact, there is no official list. If you go online and try to search exactly what resets learning phase, you'll get a bunch of articles from people like me that are saying, yeah, this is what does it and what doesn't reset learning phase, but you will not find anywhere where Facebook has published that. They intentionally do not publish it. But over time, I've kind of compiled this list of items that 100% of the time reset learning phase every time, and they should be avoided as much as possible. And again, I can provide this list, and there's a couple other ones that sometimes reset learning phase that I can provide if you want to contact me afterwards. The one thing I do want to say though is that even though changing creative or adding creative resets the learning phase, that's the one, really adding new creative, that's what's changing existing. Adding new creative is still very necessary, or else you'll get, once you reach saturation, so if people have seen your ads too many times, you got to get a new ad in there to turn it up. And that actually helps you in the auction too. Without getting too complex, it helps your ability to win the auction when you refresh your creative. So that's the one thing that resets learning phase that's kind of a necessary evil. But everything else on this list should be avoided at all costs, or else you're resetting the algorithm that has to learn again. So there's a mindset at play here. I think it's a common misrepresentation that giant advertisers have to have a huge team of people constantly working on optimizing their campaigns. And you can get very granular, especially if you have a lot of products or a website that has a really complex or deep funnel with a lot of pages. But from my experience, the advertisers that see the best results are the ones that spend a lot of time setting up their campaigns properly, making sure their pixels in place properly to send back events to Facebook from their website, optimize their landing page and their website for better funnel click-through and conversion that helps those user actions we talked about earlier, and then get a really good process in place for testing ad creative, like that dynamic creative we talked about earlier. Then, once you have all that there, launch your campaigns. And the amount of effort that is put into the campaigns after that, in terms of time, really should decrease over time, even as your budget increases. So there are really, really big advertisers that are spending millions of dollars like per week. And there's not, other than creative, there's not a ton of work that goes into maintaining the campaigns if they keep a simplified structure, which is what 95% of advertisers should do. At that point, you're really just optimizing your creative. And you should try to beat your current creative. That's where you can really make the most gains. And you need to fine tune, your budgets per campaign to meet your objectives, whether it's growth or profitability. But you don't really have to be in there every single day looking at every single ad set. You should have an idea and then have checkpoints to see what has changed. Then you can get into some manual bidding, which is a little bit too complex for this walkthrough. But most of the time, I think people get concerned that, oh, I'm going to have to spend so much time on this, and that's true up front. But once, again, you understand the tenets, you can do this in-house, or someone in your team can, and it won't be like this 60-hour a week job, even at big spending amounts. There's two different ways to kind of manage your budgets within the ad platform. You can put the budget at the campaign level with campaign budget optimization. And this is what I recommend 90% of the time. This feeds the algorithm and it allocates your budget based on machine learning to get you the best outcomes per ad set. So I would give $30 to this campaign, and the algorithm would say, run it for a little bit. Usually it gives them each about equal amounts of $10 each. Run for a little while, then it might say, oh, ad set one's doing better, and the algorithm's telling us it's going to do better in the future too. So now we're going to give it $20, and these two each $5. This structure works 90% of the time. Or you can, as is the case on the right, you can put the budget at the ad set level, and you tell Facebook, hey, get out of here, I'm going to manage my own budget. Now remember, the ad set level is where you're defining your audiences. So a few reasons you might want to control your budget at the ad set level instead of the campaign level and just let Facebook optimize it on its own is that campaign optimization strategy might not work if your business has like strict budgets separated by region or markets or anything that's at the audience level. We have to define geographic or age. So if you have to control the budget based on any of that stuff, you almost have to go over here. Also, if you want a specific amount of money or a particular product or a particular audience, again, to get a certain amount of budget, you can kind of determine the exact spend you want to manage at the budget level when you go to the ad set. If you turn on the campaign budget optimization, it may move budget away from the new product you wanted to test if it's not performing well. And here's the crappy thing, it does it very quickly too. So if one product has a longer typical close time than another product, the budgets for those two products either need to be managed at the ad set level or they need to be separate campaigns. I'll give you an example. For Cuddle clones, we have our plush Cuddle clone, then we have a golf club head cover. They're very similar products, but the profile of who buys those products is different enough that the audiences are different. And over time, we've kind of learned this. Now, if I were to put them in the same campaign, it might not spend the budget between those two products the way that I want to spend them. This is especially true if you have products that have inventory. Let's say you got a giant inventory of one product and it's not just made to order like Cuddle clones are. You have a giant inventory in one side and you set in a small inventory of another product and you put them underneath the same campaign. Well, the campaign might give more budget to the product you have small inventory of, but business manager wise, you might say, I need to get rid of this inventory in Q4 because it's holiday specific, it's Christmas themed or whatever. In that case, again, you got to go with the ad set level or create separate campaigns. I will admit that I prefer to really get in the weeds and carve up the budget manually a bit more. However, if you don't have a lot of experience doing that, or you haven't really scaled your budget yet, I highly recommend sticking with campaign budget optimization. And this is a simple kind of structure that will work for a lot of companies. So you have your prospecting, your cold audience, people who've never heard of you. Would be your broad audience. So you can keep it really broad, just male, female, no specific age, just in the US. Or you could do it by interest, so dog lovers or likes golf, maybe a couple more interests, but pretty broad. You get your lookalikes of purchasers, lookalikes of add to cart, And then again, that 3% lookalike of purchasers, but with some more interest. So they make a certain amount of money or they like cats. Retargeting, also called warm audience advertising. There's a ton of different ways you can carve this up. You definitely want to have ads going to people who have hit your cart and initiated a checkout but have left and not purchased. That is your bread and butter. You got to convert those people. General site visitors. Now this can be broken down into a couple of things. So you could say, all right, just anybody who visits my site, excluding cart people. So people that got to the cart are going to get these ads. But anyone else who just visited the site and didn't get to the cart, I'm going to give them these ads. Well, here's where you can get more granular, and you can either do manual bidding or keep it underneath the campaign budget optimization. But you can go by product. So people who visit this specific product page are going to get ads that are specific to that product. If you only sell one product, or it's a SaaS or something, then you don't have to worry about that product granularity. But if you have multiple products, dozens of products, you probably want product specific retargeting for landing pages, product landing pages. You can do ad set, email list, people who have visited or viewed 95% of your video view watchers. There's tons of ways to carve this up. And again, we can get into more detail of that, but this in particular is kind of the bigger, broader list of retargeting. And again, what CBO does is you say, here's my budget, CBO. The budget's up here. It's at the very top. I have $1,000 a day. Facebook will determine how much money to give each of these, and it will optimize all 4 of them. All right, so the last bit here, if you're going to scale, you really need to understand your financials. So what's your current return on ad spend? Is it 2.0? So every $500 you spend, you make $1,000. You can kind of figure out your ROI from there. So for a lot of businesses that have a positive ROI, your ROAS needs to be above, like quite a bit above 1x, but at least above 1x to account for costs outside of ad spend, fixed costs, and anything else that has to do with like COGS and stuff like that. So I would recommend once you start to scale, because your ROAS is going to change quite a bit. Generally speaking, when you raise your ad spend, your return on ad spend will fall. Your performance will fall. So if I'm spending $1,000 today and getting a 3x return on ad spend, if I start spending $5,000, I'm likely not going to keep that 3x ad spend, return on ad spend. It's probably going to drop because at $1,000 a day, Facebook is highly targeting the profile of what my purchaser looks like. If I say, Facebook, spend way more than $1,000 a day, spend $20,000 a day, it has to throw a wider net to people that now see my ads. And it's not going to highly target that profile that I know are my purchasers. It's got to go a little bit wider because I'm telling it to spend more money. Come higher, hold water, spend more money. I'm trying to grow this business, Facebook. So it's going to throw a wider and wider net, and profile is going to get more and more diluted. So your return on ad spend is going to drop as you spend money. The thing that I would say is that to understand what you do strategically based on that info is what you're doing at a company level. Are you growing top line revenue, all else be damned, or are you trying to grow revenue but be profitable? Or are you a mature company who's been doing this for a while and now you want to optimize for profitability? So either approach, if you're trying to grow top line or just settle into a good profitable place, you got to do essentially the same thing. So you have to know your average order value of your website. You have to know your customer acquisition cost. This is the amount of ad spend money I have to spend to get a customer. You have to know your cost of goods sold and your fixed costs, which a lot of people do not consider in this approach. So to determine my break-even ROAS, so the company at a company level breaks even when I spend X amount of money. That considers, all right, I spend X amount of money, I get Y amount of revenue. That revenue has to cover my fixed costs and my cost of goods sold. And at the point that those two things equal, my revenue and fixed costs and cost of goods sold, there's my break-even ROAS. You can put pedal to the metal all the way towards that break-even ROAS, and even past that break-even ROAS if your number one company goal is top-line revenue growth. And I know a lot of people who have investors and who are just trying to get users, that is your goal. You're not really worried about profitability. You're just growing the user growth and growing revenue. And that's okay, but you have to know what your break-even ROAS is to know when you're starting to hurt yourself by spending more money. Now, it's a very similar approach to becoming, optimizing for profitability too. At some point, your ROAS is going to start to trend downward per product, per campaign, and per the ad account. And you just got to kind of monitor it. It's always with these same metrics: average order value, customer acquisition cost, COGS, fixed cost. And you'll start to see at some point your company profile or your company profitability, the next dollar you spend in ad spend, actually as a company level, your profitability went down. Find that peak, and it'll probably move around here and there, but find out where it is over a statistically relevant amount of time. And if you're seasonal, that might have to be, several months, maybe even a year if you're mature. But set up the structure to know what you're going for. And I've consulted for a number of people, and they say, oh, do you want to be profitable, or are you trying to really grow? Both. The answer really cannot be both. One of them has to be the primary KPI. And that's a big thing that I would say take away from this. Both is great, and you can grow and be profitable, but you're gonna grow less if you're being profitable. So if you really want to grow to the extreme, you're gonna sacrifice some profitability, and your CAC, that customer acquisition cost, is gonna go up because you're throwing a wider net again. So here's some key takeaways before we go into Q&A. Simplify account structure whenever possible. Fewer ad sets and campaigns means more concentration. Sorry, that sounds really off on me. Campaign optimization is amazing. 90% of people, it's what you need to do. Don't worry about manual bidding. If you do want to do manual bidding, it can help really narrow in on your ROAS and optimize it. But you probably should talk to me afterward if you want to do that. I would recommend staying with CBO. Stay laser focused on your signal volume. That's that 50 events per week. At a minimum, spend the amount of money you need to spend to hit 50 conversions per week, or else you're not letting the algorithm optimize and do what it can do. Last one's here: set fewer constraints on the auction. Open up all ad placements, do broader audiences. You can do lookalikes to help that if you have existing purchasers already. Be very mindful of significant edits, learning resets. Do not reset the learning phrase unless it is because you're adding new creative. All the other items that I had in that list that reset the learning phase, do not do that. Already talked about automatic placements. Allow Facebook to put your ad in every ad placement possible, the right rail on Facebook desktop, everywhere it is, because the algorithm will eventually refine it down to only the placements that work for you. So don't say, oh, I don't want to be on Instagram. Let it be on Instagram. It'll eventually learn that your customers don't want to be on Instagram if that is the case. And pay attention to the post-click user experience. Once people get to your site, make that site mobile friendly, which is everyone says, but make it as fast as you can. Shorten your funnel if you can. And the last thing that's not on here is go into your ads and look at the comments. Engage with those people, because if you engage with those people, they'll engage back with you, and your user score goes up. Your engagement score on this ad goes up. A lot of people do not do that, and that's an easy way to lower your ad costs. That is it. A lot of information. Let me know if we got any time for Q&A.
If John doesn't, then I'll ask one that might be useful to people listening to the recording. If I don't want to do any of this, and I don't know much about marketing, and I am going to hire an agency, are there specific questions I can ask? Because they're all going to say, oh, we totally can do this better than you. We're going to get you so much return on your ad spend. It's going to be crazy. And yet, what we've seen, Adam, is that that's not really true. There's a lot of agencies, and not many of them are that good. And so are there any red flags to watch out for as a founder when we're interviewing marketing agencies?
It is I will say there are a couple general red flags. It is tough though, because if you don't have domain knowledge of this to some degree, you
Right.
probably don't know the right questions to ask, which is where you really kind of get out, weed out the bad ones. What I would ask them is, well, what I would look for is how much do they ask me about my product offering? Do they ask me about what my average order value is, what my past conversion rates have been? Do they show me, could they show me a client example of how they optimized ads? Because again, a lot of agencies, a lot of them are just really bad, but let's even say the good ones that actually do know how to set up campaign structure as well. They may, if part of your agreement with them is that they create the creative as well, I would say, show me your creative for past clients, if there's no privileges there, and there really shouldn't be, and how you optimize that and how often. So did you just create 3 ads and you threw it out there and those are the 3 ads that ran all year? Do you turn that over every couple of weeks? And how do you turn it over? If they don't do element testing or some kind of testing of creative versus creative, they just create new creative and throw it out there, that's a red flag for sure. Yeah, that is a good point. Their titles are overlapping quite a bit in this area, and the skill sets are very, very different. That is a red flag. Yes, agreed. Yeah. So the lookalikes are based on your actual customers. So in the kind of 3 approaches to an audience, you can go super broad, just no designation of who that person is. You can go super narrow, and this is within the Facebook ad platform. I choose, female, likes cats, all that stuff. The lookalike is nothing you can choose in the Facebook ad platform. It's something you have to have already, essentially. So if you've had uh, I don't know, you've been running your business for a year or 6 months or whatever, and you have 500 to 1,000 purchasers, and as long as you have their email addresses, and there's other things you can have that can kind of work, but email addresses is really the main thing you need. You can upload a CSV with their email addresses to within the ad platform in an area called audiences, and it will run through those email addresses, and it will find the user that if they use that email address to log in to Facebook or Instagram, it'll find them. So it finds them, and the cool thing you can do is you can now market to those people, even though maybe you never have before on Facebook already, and say, hey, I know you already signed up for our, let's say it's a software as a service, whatever. I know you already signed up for a subscription, but we're adding this extra thing. So there's a really, even outside of doing scaling, there's a cool thing just to be able to market to those people now if you never have before. But once you have that group in Facebook, you can say, all right, Facebook, here's the people, you've found them, you found the literal actual customers I have. Now you just click this button that says create a lookalike audience of a bunch of people that look like these people, demographically, behaviorally, same browser history, same interests, same buying habits. And it will go find 1 million people that as closely as possible resemble the group you just uploaded. And then from there, you can throw ads to that group. And that's a cold audience. They've never, presumably, have never seen of you, never heard of you. So it's cold, but they already profile like people who you know have purchased your product. So it's kind of a kickstart that you don't have to get to that 50 purchases before it's kind of optimized. Essentially, the profile should be already optimized. Now, algorithmically, it still needs to get to 50 purchases, but the conversion rate and the click-through rate should be a lot better right out of the chute because the profile is already refined, if that makes sense. That's a great question. At the campaign level, you can exclude purchasers. So like this is not really answering your question, but if someone did purchase and they came back on, they won't see those ads anymore. You excluded them, and you can exclude them for up to 30 days or forever if you wanted to. Now, what you just mentioned is refreshing lookalike audiences, and that does need to happen, especially if you only go with like a 1% lookalike audience and you saturate it. So I'm gonna back up just a minute. So let's say you uploaded that lookalike audience, and you said, all right, give me the top 1% of Facebook users that look like these people. Well, that top 1%, Facebook defines as the next closest 1 million people. So now you got that 1 million people there, you're advertising to them. Well, over time, that 1 million people is going to become saturated where they've seen your ad 10 to 20 times. At that point, let's say that took you 3 months to saturate that audience. Well, now they're not really clicking through as much as they were. People that were going to buy probably already have bought. And over the last 3 months, you've just gained 3 more months of purchasers that you didn't have before. So now you can go back and take all your purchasers, the ones that were originally created your lookalike audience, and all the ones that you've got from marketing this new cold lookalike audience, take all those purchasers, re-upload it to Facebook, create a new lookalike audience, and start a campaign there. Now it's better to visually show you this, but that new one that you're creating, so it was all your purchasers now, new lookalike, you still don't really want to market to that old lookalike audience, which might be a fair amount of this new group too, because they profile very similarly, right? There's a way to exclude your old lookalike audience. So really you're only seeing, the new people are only seeing your ads, not the old people. And that gets a little bit more complex, but, and I had one little, I'll probably scroll back through here. It's this right here, excluding your 1% lookalike. That's essentially what I'm talking about. Now, this was to do it right out of the gate, but this concept's the same, that if you go through time and you eventually want to exclude people you've already touched, you just throw them into an exclusion part of the profile or the ad set. It depends is the answer. So I'll come here. Conversion rate always seems to be king. I'll go to this example. You kind of have to know what, I would say what's driving it is what is your ideal CAC, your ideal CAC. Because conversion rate really doesn't mean much unless it's in the context of how expensive your ads are. So you could say, oh yeah, we always want 2% over 1.2% on your conversion rate. Well, in this case, you actually do want the 1.2% because that audience is so much cheaper. So I would put it in terms of CAC, but to get kind of what you're asking is if you have historical CAC or if you have an ideal or a goal for your CAC, that's what I say is acceptable or not acceptable based on your audit or your campaign performance. And I would even go one step further, that you have an acceptable CAC for your cold audiences and an acceptable CAC for your warm audiences. And then you have kind of like a weighted average, which is really your like company-wide CAC. So your cold audiences, you know we're not going to convert that well, or at least compared to your warm audiences who've been to your site or already viewed ads or whatnot. So if you combine those together, you have your company CAC, but individually, you might say cold audiences, we're willing to take 2x the CAC of our warm audiences because it's going to even out to what we find acceptable as a whole. Yeah. Yeah, sure. It's a good question. I don't usually make them big changes, so like more than 10% budget changes, more than once a week. And the reason for that is not so much on the return on ad spend adjustments, which I know is kind of the crux of your question. It's mainly because I'm testing creative every week, so I don't want to change the creative and then midweek also change the budget. That's a second thing that can throw off the testing, attributing the results of the test to the creative. So my kind of best practice thing would be to only change it once a week. And I would go ahead and map out kind of what your ideal ad budget growth. So 1,000 this week, 1,200 this week, 1,500. And if you can stick to that, great. Now you may find that your performance is just killing it in a really good scenario. And you say, all right, I don't actually care if I reset the learning phase because I'm getting 10x return on this stuff and Christmas is coming up or something. And I have all this cash. Like some scenario in which you're like, I'm not going to slow play this to not exit the learning phase. I'm going to go ahead and make a significant edit by blowing up my budget by 50% or 100%. You go ahead and do that. So if you're at maturity and you're kind of still growing, but you're not like starting off new, then I would make no more than 10% budget changes because the auctions you go into can be disrupted by more than 10% changes, which is actually not something I have on here. It doesn't reset learning phase, but it can adjust the auctions you go into. So my general answer to that would be once you're kind of at maturity or not starting off, I guess I should say not maturity. Once you're not starting off, you've been doing it for a number of months, then I would stick to about 10% per week. Yeah, man.